On March 6, 2019, a frustrated homeowner filed a class action lawsuit that, if the judge rules in his favor, could undo the real estate industry as we know it forever. The lawsuit was filed against the National Association of Realtors and some of the largest real estate companies in the world. RE-AFFIRM, which owns Coldwell Banker, Century 21 and others, Keller Williams, RE/MAX, and Berkshire Hathaway. The complaint filed alleges that these companies are in violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act by requiring listing brokers to make a blanket, non-negotiable offer of buyer broker compensation in the MLS. The plaintiff alleges that this rule inflates the cost homeowners incur when selling their home that otherwise they would not have to pay if the buyer's agent was compensated directly from the buyer. The plaintiff in the case takes the position that buyers should compensate the buyer's broker directly and that MLSs should not make it a requirement that listing brokers offer buyer agent compensation when entering a listing into the MLS. If this was the case, class action members claim they would have saved thousands of dollars in real estate commissions. The complaint filed, however, fails to recognize a few key truths. Commissions agreed to be paid are between the seller of a home and the listing broker, not buyer brokers or buyer agents. Even some so-called industry experts get this wrong.
Unlike any other business, when a homeowner decides to sell using a real estate agent, he must agree to pay two agents. First is the listing agent, who represents the seller's best interest in the home selling process. Now, although technically negotiable, the average listing fee commission is 2.5 to 3% of the sale price. But in addition to paying his listing agent a commission, he also has to pay the agent who represents the buyer.
In other words, the commission agreed to be paid by the seller in a real estate transaction are 100% payable to the listing broker. The listing broker then offers to compensate a buyer's agent if, and only if, they bring a buyer that writes an offer the seller accepts. At the time a seller agrees to list their home, it's impossible to determine how a buyer will be procured for the home. The seller could find the buyer, the listing agent could find a buyer without another agent, and a buyer's agent could bring a buyer. In any case, the seller agreed to pay the same commission regardless of how the buyer is procured. In fact, according to NAR, in 2021, 34% of all closed transactions had only one agent involved, where the listing agent was able to procure the buyer of the home without a buyer's agent being involved. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but the whole basis of the plaintiff's complaint is about paying buyer agent commissions. So my question is this: the seller agreed to pay the listing broker a 6% commission to sell the home. What if there was no buyer agent in the transaction and the listing agent was the one who found the buyer, like 34% of all transactions? Would this lawsuit have ever been filed? At the time of listing, it's impossible to determine if there will even be a buyer's agent involved in the transaction, and the assumption made in the lawsuit that commissions paid by the seller are inflated due to buyer agent compensation is absolutely off base. In May 2019, NAR's Vice President Williams issued a public response on the class action lawsuit, stating that we believe that the lawsuit fostered by several plaintiffs' class action law firms is completely without merit. We will defend the challenged policies, and we are confident that we will prevail. NAR also moved to dismiss the case on the basis that the complaint misrepresents NAR's rules for the operation of multiple listing services, which have long been recognized by the court systems across the country as protecting consumers and creating competitive, efficient markets that benefit home sellers and home buyers. The filing was made in federal court in Chicago. The motion to dismiss was then denied by Judge Andrea Wood, who said this: the court finds that plaintiffs have sufficiently pleaded that they suffered an antitrust injury from defendants' conspiracy. Each plaintiff was a home seller required to pay a commission to a buyer broker for the person who purchased their home. But for defendants' conspiracy, each plaintiff would have paid substantially lower commissions, such an industry as assuredly of a type that the Sherman Act was designed to prevent. Then, in October 2019, something no one saw coming happened. The Department of Justice filed a statement of interest in the class action lawsuit against NAR and a slew of other brokerage firms. The DOJ stated the consent decree resolved the United States antitrust claims against NAR for its exclusionary policies targeting brokers using innovative platforms. In this case, the United States did not examine the rest of NAR's policies, including those at issue in this case, and therefore, those policies simply were not subject to antitrust scrutiny. Basically, it's the DOJ wanting to investigate the issues in this lawsuit. Shortly after the announcement from the DOJ, the class action lawsuit took an interesting turn in favor of NAR. There was a proposed settlement between the DOJ and NAR that, number one, the amount of compensation offered to buyer's agents for each MLS listing be made publicly available. Number two, changes to the standard of practice 12-1 of the Code of Ethics is definitely to state buyer agents cannot represent their services as free to their clients. Number three, MLS rule revisions to reaffirm that MLSs and brokerages must provide consumers all properties that fit their criteria regardless of compensation offered or the name of that listing brokerage. Notably, this would prohibit MLS listings from being filtered based on compensation amount or the name of the brokerage or listing broker for that matter. And then number four, a new requirement that the seller's prior approval, licensed real estate agents be given access to lockboxes of properties listed on the MLS, even if an agent does not subscribe to the MLS. But then the DOJ withdrew from the proposed settlement. The interesting thing that happened during this time was not only did the DOJ withdraw from the settlement with NAR, the DOJ took a position that was not in agreement with the plaintiff. This shifted the burden to the plaintiff's attorneys to now explain why the Department of Justice settlement with NAR was inadequate. The burden of proof was then shifted from the real estate industry defending its current positions and policies to the plaintiff trying to undermine the wisdom of the Department of Justice. As the parties of this case continued to battle it out in court, in late 2021, one of the largest defendants in the case, RE-AFFIRM, made a public legal filing calling for NAR, which is also a co-defendant in the case, to eliminate their commission sharing requirement. This could have a major impact in the case, as one of the main defendants in the case takes a position that is in direct alignment with one of the plaintiff's complaints, which is for NAR to no longer require buyer agent compensation to be mandatory when listings are submitted to the MLS. In the filing, the CEO of RE-AFFIRM and Coldwell Banker, Ryan Gorman, told the court it's the position of RE-AFFIRM that the mandatory nature of NAR's cooperating compensation rule to be rescinded. Now, why would RE-AFFIRM seemingly take a position against themselves in the case, you ask? Here's what Gorman went on to say. We like to share our views and advocate with those who can make some changes that could be helpful to the industry, he said. Not everything has to be done immediately, but we think it aligns closely with our overall view and increasingly vocal stance on the value of transparency within the industry. So as the case continues, one major question remains unanswered. What would be the impact on the real estate industry if the judge ruled in the plaintiff's favor? A ruling in the plaintiff's favor could have two massive negative consequences to the real estate industry. One, currently, buyers are able to finance the entire purchase price of the home minus their down payment, which include real estate commissions paid by the seller. If this goes away and buyers are required to compensate their agent out of pocket, home affordability could be more of a challenge than it already is. Number two, if buyers are required to compensate their own agent, it's likely that they will forgo having their own representation and go directly to the seller's agent to negotiate. This causes major problems for the buyer, as the listing agent has a fiduciary responsibility to the seller, and buyers would be left out to dry in every real estate transaction. It would shock me to see the DOJ and the federal court system rule in this favor, as these issues laid out would negatively impact the consumer, which the DOJ stands to protect. The case is currently in the discovery phase, as both sides gather information. The next big milestone in the case is the scheduling of a trial. Right now, the status of the case is a proposed class action. Until the court certifies the case as satisfying the criteria set out in Federal Rule of Civil Procedure 23, the case remains a putative class action, and the unnamed class members remain that putative class. Nonetheless, the future of the real estate industry weighs heavily on the outcome of these antitrust lawsuits.